Alright, chapter 8. This is when we get to the unification of China. Later Zhao and the Warring States, lasting from 403 to 221 BCE. If you recall from earlier, when the Zhao dynasty collapsed, various states within China began fighting amongst each other for power. This leads to absolute and total political chaos, with no central power able to take hold of all of China. However, funny enough, in this time of great turbulence, you also get this beautiful explosion in culture. You had various, it wasn't really 100 schools of thought, but you had many different philosophies arising from this chaotic mess, which sought to determine, how do we unify China, how do we treat each other with respect, how do we understand our universe, and so on and so on. If you want to see something similar, you can fast forward several centuries to Mao Zedong's aborted Let 100 Flowers Bloom program. Like I said before, all these programs were looking for harmony and order. Just trying to bring back China from the destructive mess it had gotten itself into. So the three main philosophies are Confucianism, Taoism, and Legalism. So Confucius. Now, Confucius is the Latinized version of what the Chinese call Confucius, who we believe lived from 551 to 479 BCE, but we really don't know when he actually lived. It's just an estimate. He was known as master philosopher of Kong by many of his disciples. He grew up as an aristocrat. However, he was unwilling to compromise with his principles. So as a result, he got fired. And couldn't get a job. In fact, he was unemployed for 10 years, just constantly wandering in order to get a government post. He never managed to do that and died soon after. However, along the way, he would preach many of his philosophies, and they were collected by his disciples in a series of quotes in a text containing his quotes called the Analects. Some ideas of Confucius. It mainly focused on ethical, political, and practical matters. Not surprising considering the fact that China is quite literally destroying itself with various states. One of the major political ideology. One quote that quite emphasizes Confucian ideas regarding politicians is the quote, "When a prince's personal conduct is correct, his government is effective at issuing orders." Basically, if the leaders are good, if the leaders are benevolent and well educated, the government will work itself out. As a result, Junzi, I'm terribly mispronouncing that probably, or superior individuals were considered more important than state structure or laws, which is a contrast to Western civilization, which is more law focused. Confucius also preached that these Junzi and educated people should be active in government service in order to ensure the smooth running of government. It tended to avoid religion or metaphysics, because Confucius found these these matters of thought completely useless and incapable of being understood. He emphasized the study of the Zhao dynasty text in order to see, what makes a good leader, what makes a bad leader, how do you conduct yourself, how not to conduct yourself, etc., etc., etc. And these Zhao dynasty texts would later form the cortex of Chinese education, the Chinese education system, and their exams. In terms of values, Confucius emphasized kindness and benevolence, aka Ren. He believed that this was desperately needed in government officials in order to ensure that they are effective. Propriety / ritual, known as Li. This is basically courtesy or conventionally appropriate behavior or deference to superiors. And then there's filial piety, or Zhao. Basically means support and respect elders in life and after death. This means that, obviously pay homage to your ancestors during life, but also honor them after death and continue the works that they started in order to honor their legacies. Confucius believed that practicing these traits will lead to the development of Junzi, or superior individuals. Once you have Junzi, you have ideal leaders. and thus government will work itself out. Sorry. Apparently my phone was ringing. One of the major now after Confucius, you had some other two other main philosophers, two other main Confucian philosophers who would expand on Confucius' original ideas. One of them was Mencius, who lived from what we believe 372 to 289 BCE. He was a principal Confucian scholar, like I said. He was an optimist, believing in the power of kindness and benevolence, or Ren. He believed that human nature is naturally good, and however, he was not influential during his lifetime because he was considered naive. However, he was considered a prime exponent of Confucius thought after the 10th century. Then you have Shunzi, living from 298 to 238 BCE. He, unlike Mencius, sorry about that, I just have to go back. Zunzi actually had a government post, and therefore he could actually see the nasty parts of human beings, and thus he believed that humans are fundamentally selfish. He believed in the emphasis on rigid propriety or respect of Confucianism. He also believed in discipline. Humans needed to be tamed like wood. However, like Mencius, he believed humans could be improved. They both emphasized education and being active in improving government and society. However, you have one philosophy that criticized Confucianism was Taoism. Like I said, they were critics of Confucius. They were passive, rejecting active attempts in government as absolutely pointless in changing the course of events, believed that only led to more chaos. To avoid this extra chaos, they emphasized living in harmony with natural principles that govern the world. It was found religion. The philosophy was founded by Lao Tzu in 6th century BCE. Its critical text was the Tao Te Ching, or the Classic of Way and Virtue. The Tao, one of the major critical forces in Taoism, it is known as the way of nature or of the cosmos. It's very elusive. You really don't know what it really is. It's kind of there, but at the same time, it's hard to discern it. The Tao does nothing but accomplishes everything. Again, it's one of those logical paradoxes. The Taoists believe that the Tao is like water, soft and yielding but capable of eroding rock. It's non-existent, but it is essential. And they believe that if you lived in harmony with this force of nature, the way of nature, you will achieve harmony. Like I said before, Taoists believe that if you try to control the universe, it's pointless, which just leads to more chaos. They believe that in order to restore order, you must disengage. So this means no advanced education, no ambition, and simple living in harmony with nature. They pushed for the cultivation of self-knowledge. They believed that less government was the better, and they did not believe, and they didn't try to make themselves filthy rich or display their wealth. They believed that long-term non-metal individuals led to harmonious societies. Confucianism was a public doctrine. However, Taoism was a private pursuit because it was mostly focused on the individual. So you got this ironic combination that allowed intellectuals to pursue both. They were not mutually exclusive. You could be Confucian by day and Taoist by night, which many scholars did. Then you have, however, neither of those philosophies could successfully unify China. So what you have to unify China is legalism. It emphasized on development of the state. It was very, everything must be centered around the state and its improvement. They were ruthless. They believed in a ruthless government in which the ends justify the means. Kind of a predecessor to Niccolo Machiavelli in the 1500s. They emphasized the role of law, which they believe was a tool of the leader who himself is actually above the law. They advocate for the strict punishment for violators. Their key text was written by Shang Yang, lived from 390 to 338 BCE, known as the Book of the Lord Shang. The philosophy was systematized by Han Feizi, who lived from 280 to 233 BCE. However, his own philosophy ended up killing him because he was forced to commit suicide by poison by his political enemies. There you go. the two strengths of the state are agriculture and military. Therefore, the only thing you really should care about, political leader should care about, is the development of the peasant and soldier classes in order to strengthen the agriculture and military. In order to strengthen agriculture and the military. They really did not like pure intellectual cultural pursuits and merchants. They focused on harsh laws and consistent severe punishments for even the smallest infractions. They practiced collective responsibility, like the Nazis later on. Basically, if a group has one, misbehaving member, the group is responsible for correcting that misbehaving member. If they fail to, well, then the entire group suffers, or just quite possibly dies. Historically speaking, it was often practiced but rarely praised. Guess why? So these are just some two, political cartoons, emphasizing the idea of, legalism, attract people with keep people at bay by attracting, but also be ready to apply harsh punishments if necessary. This is just a little review. Everyone can just skip that. Like I said, legalism really unifies China with the rise of the Qin State in Western China from 4th to 1st centuries BCE. They developed. Being hardened with fights with nomads to being a Western Chinese state, they were quite experienced with fighting nomads. This would give them a military experience edge over their neighbors. They developed and employed legalist practices. They also granted out generous land reform practices in order to create productive smaller farmers rather than these giant unwieldy farms owned by aristocrats. This land reform also decreased the power of large landholders and hereditary aristocrats. It's basically an increasing centralization of power with the king being the most powerful, followed by the peasants, and then lastly by the aristocrats. It's basically just a power dance between these three groups. The dance of power between these three groups will continue on for many years. Due to, like I said, these guys being Western China would often fight nomads, so they had advanced military technology as well as experience. First emperor of China is considered to be Qin Shi Huangdi, who reigned from 221 to 210 BCE. He founds this new Qin Dynasty as the first emperor of China. His dynasty dies in 207, but it sets a dramatic precedent. The basis of rule was a centralized bureaucracy. Massive public works projects were constructed. This included roads and a precursor to the Great Wall of China. And this is a map displaying the defensive fortifications constructed during the Qin Dynasty. Both running along the north and in the west in order to defend against nomadic invaders. There was to centralize the state. There are standardized laws, currencies, weights, and measures in order to integrate the country together. This is also quite important. Though we see the development of Chinese script in Shang Oracle Bones, if you remember from earlier, at this point in the warring states, the language had diverged into many different dialects. And often these dialects were quite incompatible with each other, despite using the same letters because of different pronunciations. So what Shi Huangdi did was he standardized a written script. You could have regional difference. You could have differences between how they're spoken, but they could all read the same script. It's basically like numbers. Everyone knows. No matter how. People in the world will pronounce numbers differently, but no one knows what a 0, a 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 mean. That's basically an analogy you can draw. Like I mentioned earlier, the Qin Dynasty constructed roads and bridges, this time with standardized widths, so now you can actually, avoid the hassles of constantly having to constantly deal with the changing road widths. Now, Qin Shi Huangdi was absolutely brutal, so some of the scholars were protested against him. The emperor decides to respond quite harshly. He orders execution of all critics. Kind of sounds like Stalin and Hitler, right? He orders the burning of all ideological works. Again, you can draw parallels with Nazi book burnings. Some 460 scholars are buried alive, others are exiled, and massive amounts of culture are lost in this period. He also Qin Shi Huangdi was also obsessed with the afterlife. He wanted to remain immortal. So, in addition to experimenting with the elixir of life, including drinking mercury, which may have contributed to his insanity, he ordered the construction of a large tomb. It's built by 700,000 workers. Slaves, concubines, and craftsmen were sacrificed and buried along with them so they could accompany with him into the afterlife. It was excavated in the tomb itself hasn't been excavated, but in 1974, 15,000 terracotta sculptures of soldiers, horses, and weapons were unearthed, guarding the tomb. So, even if he failed to survive forever, he wanted to go into the afterlife with his empire. And this is a picture, you've probably seen something similar to this, of just a large scale of the terracotta warrior army. So civil order brings down the Qin Dynasty in 207 BCE. This dynasty the Qin Dynasty doesn't really last long. A man named Liu Bang forms a new dynasty, the Han, which reigns from 206 BCE to 220 CE, so 400 years of rule. It's divided into three parts. Former Han, lasting from 206 BCE to 9 CE, which is considered the glory days. Then you have an interruption lasting from 9 to 23 CE, and then the later Han, lasting from 25 to 220 CE. Early Han policies. They relaxed Qin tyranny without returning to the anarchy of the Zhou Dynasty with its decentralized state. They allowed noble relatives to get large land holdings. However, they did maintain control of the administrative regions in order to prevent, what you saw the Zhou Dynasty with the decentralized portion, with the various regional powers drifting away from each other. However, after the Han Emperor really didn't get much help from nobles during a Zhonggu raid. Zhonggunus, I think I'm pronouncing that right. I don't think I'm pronouncing that right. Or who are also Central Asian nomads. These aren't Indo-Europeans, but they're kind of related. The emperor decided to take more central control. So, moral story, can't trust Uncle Joe. Then you have later on you have a guy named Han Wudi, who's considered the martial emperor, who reigned from 141 to 87 BC. This guy is considered responsible for massively expanding the Han Empire. He increased taxes to fund more public works, bureaucracy, and wars and expansion. He denounced legalism, but he practiced it. Reminds you, you could draw parallels with Augustus Caesar, claiming, "Oh, I am, listening to the Senate. I am, participating in democracy." No, you're an absolute dictator, and the Senate's just a rubber stamp institution at that point. Han Wudi establishes an Imperial University in 124 BCE. It was not for priests, but for candidates for government office, because he realized that in order to run an effective bureaucracy, he needed smart guys in it. He was not a lover of scholarship, but he needed an educated class for the bureaucracy. He adopted Confucianism as the official course of study. By the end of the former Han, you had 3,000 students in this Imperial University. By the end of the later Han, 30,000. The Han managed to invade Vietnam and Korea, annexing northern Vietnam and conquering a vast majority of Korea. However, they are suffering constant attacks from Turkish Zhonggunus, Central Asian nomads. These guys were, unsurprisingly, like a lot of Central Asian nomads, horsemen, and they could also be fairly brutal. Their leader Mao Din, from 210 to 174 BCE, had soldiers murder his wife and father in order to ensure ascension to power. Han Wudi managed to briefly conquer the Zhonggunus, and this allows for the opening of Silk Road, the Silk Road 1.0. This would bring economic prosperity and international trade to the Han Empire as it trades with other civilizations like Rome. This map has a major error, but because it has the Han Empire, the Zhonggunus Confederation flipped, but this is the Zhonggunus and this is the Han Empire. As you can see, they've already reached the northern Vietnam and a vast portion of Korea. You get more and more patriarchy, a subordination to elder males is emphasized, and ironically, the female virtues that are emphasized or taught by Chinese female historian These virtues include humility, obedience, subservience, and loyalty. Then let's go to iron metallurgy. Iron manufacturing expands. Iron chips and tools are abandoned for tools entirely made from iron. This allows for increased food production and superior weaponry. You had also the cultivation of silkworms. The Chinese managed to successfully selectively breed them and thus domesticate them, allowing for domesticate silkworms. They also only fed the silkworms mulberry leaves. This allowed for, while other silk-producing lands relied on wild worms, this allowed for Chinese silk to be extremely good in quality, and also consistent in quality as well. This, it basically becomes the best silk in the world. You also get the development of paper, which allows for improved communication. Bamboo and fabric are abandoned in favor of wood and textile-based paper. In 220 BCE, there are 20 million people living in China. By 9 CE, 60 million. General prosperity, like the Han Dynasty, benefits from general prosperity. There's increased agricultural productivity. Taxes are only a small part of overall income. Now, taxes these times weren't really money. They were more of like, give me a slice of your agricultural produce. Now, because the productivity was so good, you had so much grain that it was actually just sitting in granaries and spoiling. However, they did suffer economic and social difficulties, which would help bring down the Han Dynasty. The expensive military expeditions, particularly the Xiongnu, drain state resources. As a result, taxes are increased and property is arbitrarily confiscated more and more. There's an increasing gap between the rich and the poor, as slavery, tenant farming increases, and banditry and rebellion also rise as a result. The reign of Wang Ming is considered from 9 to 23 CE is considered an interruption in the Han Dynasty. Wang Ming was a regent for the 2-year-old emperor in 6 CE. He takes power for himself in 9 CE. He introduces massive reforms in an attempt to solve the problem. As a result, he becomes a socialist emperor. He emphasized land redistribution. However, this was poorly handled. The social chaos resulting from this ends in its assassination in 23 CE. The Han Dynasty is managed with great difficulty to reassert control. However, it's considerably weaker than the emperors were in the former Han. The Yellow Turban Uprising, Yellow Turban Uprising of peasants challenges land distribution. There's also internal court intrigue. This internal infighting, not really foreign invasions, drain the Han Dynasty, leading to its collapse by 220 CE. And that's it for all. Thanks for watching.